You want to welcome, or do you just want me to dive right in?
We all know each other, right?
All right, I'm told to dive right
Just
in.
dive right into it, yeah.
Thanks.
Maybe.
I don't know that I would say that we've been struggling with, but there has been a number of instances where the town has had shipping containers used for purposes in town that our code doesn't allow. In fact, I think the Planning and Zoning Commission is aware that you guys just dealt with a business that wanted to use a shipping container as a storage facility on their, as part of their operation, even though it technically would be temporary because they're gonna build out other aspects of the property. We have a number of construction firms that are using shipping containers as storage. It's a pretty secure storage option for them. Easy to lock up, keeps their equipment and materials and supplies safe. Our code, which is based off, and I'll let Nicole correct me when I say something wrong, but the 2015 IBC, and back then, there was never a contemplated use for using old shipping containers for anything. This is a relatively new phenomenon that shipping containers are being used. You can see on the memorandum that I put together, people have done some pretty creative things with shipping containers in terms of building, whether it's a pool, a he or a she shed. I've seen pictures of people creating, outdoor barbecue pit, cooking kitchens with containers. We've got folks that have created housing with shipping containers. But it wasn't until 2020 that the IBC started to catch up with the use of shipping containers as some sort of structure. The 2020 version, or the 2021 version that came out in 2020, first started to look at the use of shipping containers. The 2024, I'm sure, is expanding on that rather dramatically. I think the key for the conversation this evening is right now we have a prohibition on the use of shipping containers, and yet they keep popping up in the community. And so the question really is, does the town want to allow the use of shipping containers, and under what circumstances or parameters do you want to allow it? I think there are those that might drive around rifle and say there are shipping containers everywhere and they're sitting in the right-of-way. I certainly wouldn't necessarily advocate for shipping containers sitting out in the right-of-way, but I also look at it going, okay, that's not really that much worse than some of the trailers that I see parked as I go on a walk in town that haven't moved since I've been walking. They've been in the same position since I got here back in March. We have, not to pick on ourselves, is a shipping container better or worse than an old tractor trailer that we use for storage at the public workshop? So these are kind of some of the things that I'm looking at going, we're saying you can't have a shipping container, and yet we have an old tractor trailer sitting on our public works for our storage. So I bring this up really for a general discussion, and I think, Nicole's got a fair amount of valid concerns and knowledge that she's gotten from talking with some of the building inspectors in the area of some of the problems that can occur. But I think it's something that we just generally need to address in terms of where we're going to go with the whole conversation. There are those that would argue that a shipping container could become a relatively cheap framing for an affordable home. I don't know that that's actually the case. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But again, it's one of those things that we have to get to a point where we're saying, all right, this is what we want it to look like if you're going to go ahead and do that. I don't know that it would ever get to a position where it meets the 21-point test to be a residential structure from an architectural perspective in the community. And so we just bring it up as a general discussion for you guys to hash it out. As an
Hash it
option.
out.
Hash it out.
Yeah, I have actually got into mini homes made out of shipping containers. And they had little kitchens and little things, like everything looked just like a little house. I've actually been in one back in Colorado Springs. So it is amazing what they can do with it now. I'm not advocating for or against, but I'm just saying, I've been into one and
You know, I'd have no quarrels with a shipping container. I know there's one, well, when I did my addition,
Tiny
Mike
house.
let me put a small one in, but it was 120 days. So I'd have no quarrels like behind us where they're building over there. They moved one in to secure everything because, you know, they had a trailer.
I didn't know that one was there.
You know, but, you know, because I know construction sites, they've had trailers, they get hooked on and stolen. So I'd have, you know, I personally, myself as a builder would not mind seeing them, you know, with the day, especially on like new construction or whatever, with maybe a time limit. I mean, that's just my thought.
Aesthetically,
start
they're-
with.
Sorry, aesthetically, they're more pleasing than the tractor trailer. Just my opinion.
Yeah, the only thing I have with the tractor trailers is they're so high, you know? I mean, if you take the wheels off, then at least they're the same shape and size as a shipping container. But then years ago, we had a tool rental place down here on South 7th, and that was his office, was a shipping container. You know, and that didn't look bad. But what I'm afraid of is somebody getting a shipping container and then they realize how much money and time it takes to cut and weld and fabricate and get the thing together. And then once they realize that, they just leave it sit in their yard and not do anything with it. Or it turns into a shed. And then all of a sudden we have that issue of shed, you know, it being a shed. But have you had a lot of people ask about shipping containers?
Not residentially, just commercially. And it's just like what Jerry was saying with something that's temporary.
Yeah.
The Planning and Zoning Commission, I don't know who all was on there about a year ago. There was a request from somebody in the Silt Trade Center that we took to the Planning and Zoning Commission for guidance, and then Mark had brought it to the Board of Trustees. I don't know, I think you were already on the board at that time, maybe.
I think so, because there's one on the east end of the trade center. Is that the one?
And the guidance was that it could be that the trade center was considered more of an industrial use, and that shipping containers could be used there as long as they meet the screening requirements in the PUD. Outside of that, we were guided that there's no other shipping containers allowed in town because they're not aesthetically pleasing. So that's why we wanted to bring it back in front of everybody, because we have had people ask to use it on a temporary basis for construction purposes. We haven't had anybody approach us about using it for the uses that were pictured in the agenda summary. But
Oh.
it is only a matter of time before somebody does. So that's why we wanted to make sure we had the discussion now.
Got you. Okay. Yeah, and I mean on a temporary basis, like you said, I mean you see job trailers sitting around, but on a temporary basis, I'd be fine with that. Or in the trade center, still debating throughout town. I mean, if it's just going to be a shipping container just sitting there as a shed, then no. But I mean, if you get, creative and incorporate it with your house, then yeah. I don't know.
I think that's the key conversation, is to talk about, all right, it's one thing to open the door for the storage concept and what the parameters are gonna be for the storage concept. It's a whole different discussion to talk about, are we going to allow them to be used for other purposes, like a shed that looks similar to what was included in some of the pictures, or whether it's gonna be able to be used for the framing or the base for a structure. I mean, they really are two separate conversations.
I was gonna say,
and they're
the
not-
storage
they're not-
conversation's pretty simple, I think.
Yeah.
It's a much simpler conversation. because there's so many less variables.
Yeah.
I mean, temporary use for storage for a construction site or doing something like that I don't see that being an issue. Because it is, as you said, it's to be safer for their equipment, everything else. And it's gonna be a little bit more permanent, so it's not gonna be a trailer that's gonna fall off a jack or something's gonna happen. I mean, there's so many different things that could happen with all those different things, not even, whereas shipping containers just sitting there. But now with the other stuff, there's a lot of other, and again, it's, we gotta be careful how much do we wanna limit what somebody can do on their property? But then again, we also wanna not have what they're doing on their property infringe on somebody else's property.
Yeah. And like if it's gonna, well, see, but then I don't know if we want to allow that too. But okay, so say somebody buys an empty lot at the trade center and they use it to store concrete forms and they put a storage container there for their office. Like, then that kind of,
It would have to, the trade center, so the PUDs have very specific guidelines on what can be used for an office or what can be used as
Oh,
the
okay,
primary
okay.
structure or dwelling.
so that's most likely not allowed.
That wouldn't be allowed.
Okay,
Not
alright,
per the
well, that answers
PUD.
my question.
And then there's so many requirements for the shipping container to be brought to code for somebody to be able to occupy it, that it reaches beyond the scope of the codes that we have currently adopted.
I'd be curious to see what other communities have for code, like in Colorado Springs, for that.
That was out in camping side. So somebody bought a land and then they built,
Okay.
almost like hiking or camping. They would sell. So they would basically make a little tiny house and sell it for $85,000 and spend $40,000 building into it.
You go down to Cedar Ridge and they
But
got,
I
before
think
you
that
get
was
into
private
Cedar
land.
Ridge, there's a big area there. They got 30 of them out there and that's their storage facility.
Yeah.
You can get anywhere from 10 by whatever the size is. They got them cut in half, a door in each end, and they got some into thirds, and that's their storage.
Well, we don't need any.
And
more
they're
of
they're
that.
down on some concrete slabs. I mean, they're on concrete slabs, so they're bolted down. So they actually look kind of nice. They painted them real nice. You wouldn't know that they weren't a steel building.
They will.
I'm saying that's the thing too, aesthetically, I mean, there's not much of a difference between the way they looking at it from the street, between a steel building and a storage, and one of these different units.
Yeah, I mean, I think they can be safe, or they could potentially be unsafe, and there are rules obviously governing occupancy and things like that, but then with aesthetics, I think they can look good. They can also look ugly. And then I think if we were to try and make rules that were fair and uniform to say, here's what you're allowed to do or not allowed to do, I think that would be difficult, because whether or not it looks good can be very subjective.
A lot of it's subjective.
Right. The safety stuff is not so subjective, though.
Correct. And, in the 21 version of the IBC, I mean, you have to go through every bit of a rigorous approval process as any other structure.
And why rule it out similarly if it can be just as safe and it's already there, I guess, but opening the door could, yeah, I'm interested in how it could help.
Do you want to touch on the IBC
Yeah.
and the 2015
Yeah.
versus the 21 versus the 24?
My biggest concern is we jumped through a lot of hoops last year. We had to adopt the 2018 Energy Code per DORA, the Department of Regulatory Agency. We had to be at one of the 3 newest Energy Code adoptions. And as long as we did that by July 1st and had all of our adoptions completely set in stone and the second ordinance read, we did not have to jump to the 21 or 24. We did that, got to the 18, which is the lowest one that we could have gone to. So now any new code adoption is going to trigger the adoption of one of the latest energy codes. So if we do want to allow shipping containers to be used for housing purposes or storage is one thing. You don't occupy storage. If it's going to be occupied as a he shed, she shed, or anything like that, it would trigger us to have to adopt a newer code section that talks about the safety of using shipping containers, which is going to trigger a newer adoption of the energy code, which is going to increase the cost of building all around for the potential that we might have a shipping container. Somebody want to use a shipping container as the framing for housing. It's going to increase the cost for what we're definitely going to have for stick-built housing developers.
Okay.
And depending on what they require to make it habitable, it may end up costing more in the long run than just building a stick built in the first place.
That's
It's
the
hard to
feedback
say.
that I've gotten.
Yeah.
I've talked to a couple different building inspectors and Shumscoda who we're contracted with for building, and that's kind of been their experience. Even Aaron Coons that works up in Carbondale is trying to get a grip on all of this right now in that area. I've talked to a lot of the building inspectors in our area. Just trying to get an idea of what their requirements are for Connex containers, what that code adoption looks like, what the requirements look like. And Dan, our building inspector that comes here, he lives in Montrose, and so he's been the building official for Delta County, Montrose County, Ouray, Parachute, all over the western slope. And he said that he's had a total of 3 of these that have been used as framing. And he said that the metal, the way that it heats up and cools down with the varying temperatures that we have in Colorado, actually creates condensation that they can't seem to get a grip on. And so they use like a spray foam that they thought was going to mitigate it, and that actually ended up breaking down and causing mold that they had to completely strip off all of the insulation and drywall and start over again anyways. He said it ended up costing way more money than if they had just stick built it to begin with. So I think there are costs. They're still ironing things out. They're still trying to figure out, because the metal and shipping containers react differently in different environments. And so in Colorado, we can have really hot summers or really cold winters. And for them to try to, I mean, this is still new in the IBC world, or in the International Code Council world, where the IBC is created, and they're still trying to figure it out on their side, how the different metals react with different things. And then there's also testing that has to take place, that if we are going to adopt a code, we want to require that there's an environmental testing that takes place, because from the different stories that I've been listening to, you don't know what was stored in shipping containers before you get it. And so there was a family that ended up getting really, really sick because they had used that for the framing of their house, not knowing that there was some sort of like radioactive material that had been used in it before, and they were like slowly getting poisoned from it, and they didn't know. And so they had environmental testing come in and do testing, and then ended up narrowing it down that it was actually in the metal of the framing of the shipping container that they had used for the house. So there's so many questions. I think we have more questions than we do answers, really. But that's why we wanted to bring it in front of everybody to determine and figure out, because right now the bigger thing that we have is people wanting to use it in construction, shipping containers for construction purposes. And I think that that's fine as long as we put some parameters around it, because we don't want shipping containers dropped in right-of-ways or
Sorry, we had an issue this weekend where we had a neighbor moving, and they dropped a semi-trailer in the middle of our neighborhood, and it was a challenge. But it was only for
Yes.
4 days, so we buckled down and.
2 days. No wait 3 days. No wait 4 days.
No, it was 4 days. We were told, it changed, the goalposts kept moving, but,
Yeah.
but that's exactly what it is when somebody drops like a semi-trailer, it's not like you can just hook your car up to it and move it. Or you
Yeah.
can't easily move a shipping container once it's dropped. And so
Yes.
it definitely needs to have some exact parameters of where they can be placed, make sure they're not impeding anybody else's right-of-ways and all that stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's where we're kind of at with the use of the shipping containers for construction storage, is maybe we put a parameter on the size if it's in a residential zone district and make sure that that's one of the things that they have to follow is the shipping container has to be contained within the lot that they're building on,
Yeah.
which even more so decreases the size in which it can be. So there's those kind of parameters that we can put as far as like safety measures. We could make it a special use or require a site plan review, which I know are more hoops to jump through, but it just depends on how much control do we want to have over opening the floodgates of shipping containers coming into town? And what do we want it to look like in the downtown area? If it is in the commercial zone districts that we're going to allow shipping containers, is it just temporary? Is it that they can use one permanently as a special use that they have to come and present to the Planning and Zoning Commission and the trustees of what it's going to look like so that you can guide the screening of it or the look of it? And what do we want the downtown area to look like versus the Silt Trades area? Do we want that to be more industrial? Do we want Front Street to be more industrial? Do we want Main Street more cleaned up and we don't want to see shipping containers on the side of the road, even if they are screened or more cleaned up or more made to look like a wooden structure?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to keep the 2018 code as long as we can, myself.
Yeah, I do too.
So, I'm just jumping ahead here. So what if a guy wanted to put one, let's say down the road, we put them in where they could use them as a she shed, storage shed or whatever, like the smaller ones, 8x12s or whatever. They would have to put would they have to put a new roof on that, or does it have to have a pitched roof, or can they have a flat shed roof?
I think that's a key thing for you guys to decide.
I mean, that's what I'm
it's
getting
gonna
at is,
look like.
you know, because I mean,
What are you gonna
I've seen other
require?
towns use them, and they put them in their yard, and they side them and look nice, you know, and they put them on a slab, and they got a nice shed, but I don't know. That's what I was asking, if they would have to put a different roof on. I'm sure it's gonna meet snow load, but I mean,
I don't think I'd even wanna see that. I like going down the road of, we're gonna allow you to have temporary storage. I would say no to having them on Main Street. But I think in the case of the Rislendi property, you have 120 days to have storage and then you gotta get rid of it.
Well, getting the CO would mean you've got to get rid of
You gotta get
whatever
rid of the
temporary storage you
storage,
have
yeah.
in X number of days.
And that's what
7,
mine was,
10,
is I
whatever.
had
But
108.
your
Or you could do
CO is
it- I mean, it could
contingent
be like
upon
in some
that
of these
leaving.
instances, it could be like, do 120 days, but then in 120 days, you gotta basically re-up it if you wanna continue it.
I
So
don't-
that way it helps us keep it.
I think mine was 180 days. Mike gave me, and then once I got done with it, I took it out of there. So.
I think if you re-up it, then we just end up with a bunch of
Then people
storage
just keep
containers.
re-upping
Like, we're
it,
just
yeah.
gonna keep re-upping, so I think we gotta cap it.
Have a time limit
When you
on
get
it,
the
yeah.
CO, your storage container has
Yeah.
to go away. That's the
Yeah.
last step, and that includes residential as well as commercial work.
When I was just thinking,
Regardless
when you
of
said-
type,
because
when
you
your
brought
work's
up
done,
Lizenda, there's
get
so
it
much
out of
going
here.
on out there that I could see that being a longer short-term storage, but yet they also aren't impacting. I mean, there's so much open space. They're not impacting
Well, and they're
neighbors.
hidden away, like, they're
Exactly.
not impacting the aesthetic of the town, they're not
Exactly. So that makes it a little
impacting
bit
a
of a different
neighborhood
situation.
aesthetic,
That's what I was,
so,
So I just want to,
yeah.
let's not discuss a specific
you're right.
property and what they.
No,
Yeah,
I'm
just as an example, that's great, but yeah, I don't want to go down the road of discussing them particularly.
I don't think
No,
we need
that's
to go down the
100%
road
correct.
of
Thank you, Mayor.
using shipping containers as homes.
No.
If nobody here is wanting to do that,
I don't know.
Yeah.
no one's
Not
coming
as
to
homes,
us.
no.
No,
Do we
it
have
shouldn't
any
be an
information?
accessory structure
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do
for
we have
human
information
usage,
from
full stop.
community
At least
on
not in a residentially
that?
zoned
No.
area. It just shouldn't be happening.
I think we all agree on it. So I wanted to, the way my house sits, I wanted to tear my driveway out, bury 2 trailers or 2 storage containers, and then pour my driveway back underneath of it to have extra storage. So I went down this road and found out that most of these containers use lead-based paint because it stays better with the salt water. Most of them, the plywood floors are sprayed with tons of insecticides to keep the bugs off of everything they're shipping while they're on the boats. When you really get down to it, the 2 ends are the only structural part of the entire container. There's no, once you cut the side, you've lost the shear strength. So then you're going back in and welding beams back into it. So you're starting over, so you might as well build
Yeah.
from scratch. The code that we would have to adopt, if you look at the pictures that Jim put on there, none of those structures would meet the code because there's no underfloor ventilation, which is a requirement. So you're gonna have to pour a crawl space to set a shipping container on. You can't just flatten the ground or pour a concrete slab and slap it on there. So
And they're heavier per square foot.
they are, and they're not, so it's not a cheap alternative
Yeah.
to building. In a, is a camping thing where you're plowing some ground and slapping them out there, it's like putting up a yurt. Residential housing, not a good thing. If you want to build a stick frame shipping container and make it look beautiful, it'd probably cost you less than trying to modify
Convert a
one.
shipping
to convert
container
one.
into it.
A wooden container.
A wooden container. But then construction sites, I do work in the construction field, they are great. They're secure, they don't get broke into as often. If they're not getting broke into, it hopefully keeps the thieves out of silt. But those projects that do draw on for a bigger construction project that's 2 years in the making, and they can only use it 180 days, do they choose which 180 days they want to?
Well, that's where I go
Have
back
it-
to my comment about making the CO and the final inspection contingent upon now those trailers have to go away.
But if we have a 3-year project
You okay with it sitting there for
that
3 years?
sits there for 3 years, we have a lot to develop, and they pull a grading permit, and they don't get a CO for 3 years.
Would the sort of camouflage, hiding it away, making it look more stealthy, could we have criteria like that? I hear what you're saying, but
Then
by
again,
the same
too, if
token,
it's a construction site, there's gonna be a lot of other things going on there that the shipping container is probably the least aesthetically opposing thing on the site.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
And then what if we needed, I'm sorry, let me start off. What if we made it a special use or something if the project were anticipated to go beyond 120 days, for the 3-year example, then that's an extraordinary circumstance where they have to come and explain
so by permit and a renewal request.
but do it in advance or get that clearance saying, and then be subject to even greater scrutiny as far as where they put it and what it looks like, and it's not in the right of way and all of those things. But we could make it to where it's, even more scrutiny if it's gonna go beyond a certain amount of time.
Would we be okay with turning that ability to extend a permit over to town staff versus having them come back in front of P&Z and back in front of the trustees to give them the authority, based on working with the developer constantly, to be able to say, this is a justified use case, I'm gonna give you another 120 days, or no?
I think to
Well,
a point maybe,
I
and
would
then we
say-
wouldn't
I would
have
say
it to where
yeah.
it's constantly getting pushed out.
I was gonna say yes, and then if she says no, then they would have the opportunity to go before
They could
P&Z
appeal.
if they
They
wanted
could
to appeal
appeal.
it.
Yeah.
But I could not envision a lot of cases where once town staff has said, okay, no, it's been there long enough, that P&Z's be like, oh, no, sure, keep it there longer, because that's most likely, by the time town staff, I know our staff, by the time they've gotten to the point where like, no, you need to get it out of there, it's been there probably 3 months too long already. And not saying that you guys drag your feet, but that you're very forgiving and you try to work with people.
I think there's on the storage side, there's 2 different occurrences. There's initial construction, and then there's remodeling. And I think those 2 can be very different, occurrences. You could write, depending on how you want to do it, you could write code saying it's something to the effect of, in the initial construction phase, it can be for the entire construction period, but maybe once you get a certificate of occupancy, then it has to go away. That's,
Yeah.
it's gone. But then, just as an example, at some point, Holiday Inn is going to come to us, or they're going to want to remodel, and they're going to want to replace their furniture. And most of the time, I've seen hotel chains, when they do that, they're dropping a couple shipping containers on their parking lot because that's where they store all the goods. And so then that might be 120 days or 180 days or something along those lines. But I think you're kind of looking at two different concepts of how long a storage container is going to be on a site.
Yeah, you have a point, but you know, I mean, if you're building a house, like people that have job trailers, you know, they never leave a job trailer behind. They always take them with them, and if the storage container is kind of used as a job trailer, they're going to take it with them. You know, but you have a point, like yeah, because when Walmart remodeled, they had a ton of those shipping containers out in the parking lot. You know, so yeah.
Michael looks like he's got something to add to this.
Well, if the discussion had started out saying people can remodel these and live in them, I'd be opposed to that. You've already got tiny homes here. That's your standard. If you want to have a small efficiency unit for an employee or any other housing purposes. If you want to have a he shed and a she shed, well, you can go right down the highway here. They just started selling them or renting them, and I forget the name of the city.
Highway feed.
Yeah, highway feed.
I shouldn't
So,
have
I
said the
mean,
name,
that's
anyway.
the standard that I would want to see for a shed in a residential neighborhood. And probably nothing bigger. It can't be bigger than the initial structure. And is there one other thing? You know, yeah, what you've all been saying about construction sites, I think they're appropriate there. And when the construction gets CO, the trailer's gone. You know, I used to live in Summit County, and the town of Silverthorne, 45 years ago, it was all trailers. Well, people didn't call the town of Silverthorne anymore. They called it Trailer Town because they thought it made it look like shanty town. And it's taken a long time for that town to get away from that. And I wouldn't want to see us become a shanty town of trailers or shipping containers.
Yeah, like I say, I'd have no quarrels with construction or, you know, I just wouldn't want any occupancy in it. You know, and there too, we either, you know, we set the first 180 days and renewable for max amount of time or something. I don't know, you know, like you said, till whatever, but after 180 days, they have to come back, and that way you can see if there's any in 180 days, you can tell if they haven't even dug dirt yet by, you know, like, well, wait a minute here, you know, we can see nothing's going on. This is just, you know, I mean, that way at least every 180 days you could kind of progress, and if they're moving along, and the max when they get their seal or something. I mean, that's what I would somehow make that try and work. But I would be against living in them or anything like that.
Are we going to be using any for the water plant?
They're already there.
So,
And that's
so let's talk about walking
how
the
long
talk.
that's gonna last.
What,
You know,
how are we going to hold ourselves accountable to the standard?
This is the problem.
Yeah.
If you put 180 days out there, our water treatment plant project is 18 months.
Nicole will approve that extension. I'm fairly confident.
I mean,
Because if you don't,
But that's why I say it can be renewed every, you know, 180 days.
but that's an
But
extenuating
do-
use case,
do
right? I
we
mean,
want
that
it-
circumstance is
do we-
truly unique.
I don't
do we
know.
want the permit to have to be renewed if we know the project's gonna take a
No,
year?
So you
because
just
no,
have it in
because it's too
somewhere.
much
And
work
it's
for
not
them
be
to
tied
go.
to the completion of the
Yeah.
project.
And so,
agree.
because I really don't wanna put another thing
Yeah, it's
on
too much
community
paperwork for them to
development's
deal with.
plate
Yeah.
that every 90 days or 180 days, we have to worry about whether that, you know, construction storage
Yeah.
has been out there
It
too.
would be nice though to have some kind, I mean, and it would, not, instead of having part of policy be 180 days or 120 days or 307 days, to have the just estimated project time. And at that date, then what they could do is put it on the list for Angelo to go by and see if it's still there. And if it's still there the day after they said it should be done, then we can follow up and go from there, or something along those, but have an estimated project time, because then that takes away that renewal process. It makes it more efficient for the builder or the person, them, makes it more efficient for the town. but yet we still have some record of how long it's supposed to be there and what the expectation is. So it's not just an open-ended, because if you just say till the project's done, well, if I don't give you an estimated time when my project's done, well, I'm sorry, I've been working on this project for 35 years, I'm gonna finish it sometime. You just never know what's gonna happen.
No, I appreciate
Yeah.
that comment.
Who is Angelo?
He's the community development, or community.
Code enforcement.
code
Resource
enforcement,
officer.
basically.
I was thinking someone else, and that would be the building inspector. As often as they go to a job site, they have the right to inspect anything on the job site. They can inspect that as well and report to you. That'd be another way to kind of monitor it.
Yeah.
So we could tie it to the building permit itself. If a single-family permit is good for 1 calendar year. So their storage would have to meet the parameters that are set forth that we put in code, but then as soon as that building permit expires, their storage expires, or upon completion.
Yeah.
That building permit would no longer be valid upon completion.
I think that sounds like a fair solution.
I like
Less-
Michael's idea about limiting the size of it in a residential construction project as well, such that it doesn't become like a triple decker of 40-foot trailers. Oh, well, you didn't constrain the size. You just constrained the duration.
And I think it should be on their property, not on
Not in the street.
the street.
Yeah,
or
rights
any
of way,
public right-of-way.
setbacks, all those things have to be honored in order for them to utilize it.
So what if a
What
developer
about-
has several lots and they're working on this lot, can they put their trailer on
Yeah, like at Painted Pastures, yeah.
another
that's
lot?
their lot.
Or does it have to be on the lot there?
If they own several lots,
Yeah,
they
let
can
them
put it
on
on
lot.
wherever, yeah.
As long as they have, or they can even have permit, like say your neighbor has a large yard and you're building and you don't have much space because you're building. And your neighbor says, yeah, you can put your storage, your thing there, then that would be between them.
Yeah, to me, that's an outlier. That's a very, I don't want to say impossible, but unlikely.
Yeah.
I think it's.
So I don't
I
want
think
to try
it's
and
probably more
craft
likely
a
than we want.
policy
I
that's
mean-
inclusive of all the possible outliers.
I just think most people that are building a single-family house on a lot are not gonna have room for even a 20 by 10
Exactly, yeah.
shipping container.
And fitting the setbacks and stuff, because
And
the house
fitting
is taking up most
setbacks
of that
and
space.
fitting, you know, the trim carpenters are gonna be bringing their own trailer anyway, they're not gonna all use
Yeah.
one. So it almost limits it to being a general contractor developing multiple
What's the alternative?
That's true.
for a commercial project.
Yeah.
So the code currently does limit that if it's a vacant lot, you cannot have an accessory structure there, even temporary, unless there's a permanent structure. So we would have to figure that out, because then we'd also have to play that fair and equal of, well, they're building here, but their empty lot is over here, and you know, my empty lot's over here, but I'm gonna build over here. I think we'd have to put parameters, like, does it need to be an adjacent property?
Right, because it could be half a mile away, not the next lot over.
Can you,
And to your point, then they've got 3 or 4 storage containers in that extra lot that's half a mile away from where the construction's actually happening.
Yeah, but if you limit it to, you have one per building permit.
Is there any parameters on a semi-trailer for construction? I mean, I'm just saying, you know, if the, you know, if we're gonna do that, can
They
they
can-
have a trailer in a different lot, or do we, you know, we're just looking to see if there's any parameters on that?
So, our code enforcement has been hitting that hard of making sure if it's a vacant lot, that there's no accessory use taking place without a primary dwelling, without a primary use. So like that, we had one that was, there was trailers being parked on a property and, like advertisement for businesses and they own the property and they are doing work in and around town, but that's not what they were using that property for. So he had to get that cleaned up and get the trailers off of there because he doesn't have a primary use. And so we have to be careful on that code enforcement side too, to make sure that we're not setting our code enforcement officer up to tell one person one thing and then contradict himself with somebody else.
That's what I'm getting at, yeah, it's,
But out of curiosity, if there's some developer in town who has 100 lots and he's gonna build all the and he's like, I'm gonna put my job trailer here, build all these homes and do this one last, could he, so the code's saying he couldn't even do that.
The code's saying he couldn't,
No.
however, like the bigger projects that you guys have all been talking about, that all comes in front of, like, that's a site plan review. So that's something that could be
Okay,
discussed at the time
okay.
of site plan review, where the Planning and Zoning Commission can say, this project is projected to take this long, or it's part of what I can add to my checklist that I go through
Okay.
to process site plan
So that
reviews.
scenario could be allowed.
Is there gonna be construction storage, and if so, what? Because right now, people are just doing it, like over at the water plant, they didn't ask us, they didn't come and
didn't
try to
ask
pull a
us.
permit or ask for permission.
Shut them down.
They just dropped it there.
It just
And so,
showed
and,
up
but
one
people
day.
don't know, like, to them, that's just normal, they drop a construction trailer and,
And I can
And
see
that's
that
what it
in a big
is.
project like that, yeah. that-
but.
Do you also put in there that you can have the final say of where they put it in the?
A site plan review has to be exactly what it is. So whatever the Planning and Zoning Commission approves, if they deviate from that, whether it's moving locations of things or whatnot, they have to amend it and come back in front of Planning and Zoning. So the site plan approval is you're gonna do exactly this that you're telling us you're gonna do, and if you deviate, you come and amend it.
And you could potentially say, I give you permission to use these storage containers, but first you have to make sure it's okay with me where you're proposing to put it.
Yeah, so
for
we
the
can-
next year.
Yeah, we can do that as part of their initial proposal. We can tell them that they need to declare where they're gonna put their temporary construction storage and what that looks like, so that the Planning and Zoning Commission can get eyes on it. So that's the other thing is, do we wanna do it by site plan review where Planning and Zoning gets eyes on it? Or do you wanna do it by special use where both boards get eyes on it? To me, I think it's completely sufficient to have Planning and Zoning do it at site plan review. But if you want to further restrict and everybody get eyes on it, that would be a special use if they're going to have any sort of long-term construction storage.
And maybe there's a distinction between if it's gonna be longer term than it is a special use. Maybe you write, like if I'm dropping one to build a house, I've got a year to do it. You guys don't need to see that. If I'm, building out one of the lots along the river and I'm gonna be constructing for the next 3 years, and I'm gonna drop 3 trailers or 3 storage containers out there as storage, maybe it becomes a special use because it's an extended period of time.
And then at the site plan review process, the Planning and Zoning Commission, as they've already done, can put a further restriction of, you need to site it. You need to put a roof on it. It needs to look like a wooden shed. You can use the shipping container, but it needs to look nice, or it needs to be painted, or they can put a restriction so that it's not just a bunch of random colored shipping containers kind of dropped all over the place. If it's gonna be there for 3 years for construction and we know that it's a large project, then we can get some sort of uniformity with it, they all have to be white, or they all have to be earth tone colored, or they have to be sided.
I do have a question from somebody that's on the Zoom meeting. They were wondering if the county has any language on what is allowed in terms of shipping container ADUs.
So I did see that. I was reading through the county's website here as we were talking, and I do see where there's non-conforming uses, but it's not specific to shipping containers as far as I can tell right now. But the county is currently under the same code adoption that the town is, with the 2015 IBC and the 2018 Energy Code. So my guess would be that they don't. But if they do, I can't find it on their website as of right now.
Thank you.
Yes.
Are you looking for some sort of answer tonight?
I think we were looking for guidance because we're gonna have to develop an ordinance around
Some of the things
this.
that we,
Yeah.
say, okay, this is how we're doing it.
Well, I was just looking at the clock.
This was just to get, I think you made it fairly clear that you have no desire at this time to go into the realm of utilizing shipping containers as some sort of structure, however it would be configured. Simple storage,
Yeah.
you're open to the idea. We have to draft something, we have to look at what other people are doing. We've got some general parameters that we can work from, but we have to bring something back to you. And this just gets us going down in the direction that we can do something. Because We don't have anything in the code right now dealing with shipping containers as storage, and yet they're all over town, including on our property.
Which brings up the enforcement question.
Well, makes it a little hard to enforce right now.
Not saying no is the equivalent of saying yes.
Yeah.
So we are saying attached to the building permit via site plan. However, if it's a longer project than doing a special use, is that kind of the direction we are going? Or
I think that's something that we'll
Something
just,
along those lines.
we'll work towards. I think as you look at it, you'll have, I mean, both the Planning and Zoning Commission and ultimately the Board of Trustees are gonna have an opportunity to weigh in again and make changes. We'll draft something. You guys change it however you'd like.
And we can definitely take it in front of the Planning and Zoning Commission for scrutiny first, and we'll kind of hash things out and then bring it to the Board of Trustees. Once we kind of have some of those things figured out, because they do go through the rigor of site plan reviews and what that looks like, and they might have feedback that we need to add language or change language, and then we can bring it to the Board of Trustees as the final decision-making body.
Or I mean, I don't know if I'd be opposed to just having another quick session like this again.
Altogether.
Just because that way, having everybody in the room at the same time, it's easier to, instead of them saying what they say and then bringing it to us and us saying what we say and having to bounce it back, it allows it just to get hashed out much more efficiently.
Which is a great idea, because if we're meeting quarterly, by the time we actually get something together and
Might be about time
get
for
it
that
through
next
the
meeting.
powers that be, to get it to the point that it's coming in front of either board, that might be right about the timing.
It just seems to make sense to me instead of bouncing it back and forth. No reason to pass the ball back and forth if we can just all
Yeah.
work on it together.
Good. Thank you.
Okay. You guys good?
Cool.
All right. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Yes, thanks,
sir.
guys.
I'd rather talk about factory-built housing next time.
And then, hold on, I have one more thing before everybody heads out. The chamber is looking for 1 to 2 judges for their chili pasoli dessert cook-off, and they were hoping to have a couple representatives from the town.
When is it?
Well, that's a good question there, Justin.
Before I say yes or no, I don't know when it
Early
is.
October. It's like October 4th, I think.
Yes. September 3rd. Tuesday, September.
The day after Labor Day.
Oh, wait, no.
That's
No,
sooner.
that's when she's
That's
sending,
next-
hold on,
yeah,
that's when
that's
she's
next
sending out the
week.
newsletter.
No,
This
can't do
week.
it.
Actually, she doesn't have a date on
It was
here.
yesterday.
They do chicken one, but most of the time it's.
It was yesterday there, Justin, you know, we just kind of mixed it.